Hi, I'm Doug Kladder, and I'm with the Center for Environmental Research and Technology. And today, with sponsorship from the Colorado Department of Public Health and Environment, we're going to talk about radon and how we address radon during real estate transactions. I would imagine you, like many real estate professionals, have either dealt with radon or know an agent who has dealt with radon. And we want to talk about some basic steps to make it easy for you to work with your clients, but also in a manner that doesn't jeopardize the sale. Three major points that I want to talk about. First of all, radon is a concern in Colorado. Now, Colorado's not alone. It has a high frequency. And because of that, that's why we deal with radon in most of the transactions. In fact, it's a requirement of the disclosure here in Colorado. Second point is that it's easy to test for. Make it part of the normal inspection process, like looking for roofs, other leaks, other kinds of defects that may be in the property. Make it a part of the normal part of the inspection. And the last thing, which I think is really great, is that all homes can be fixed equally before or after the sale. So it's not an insurmountable problem. In fact, fixing radon is much less expensive than a lot of other contingencies that may have to be removed. But we have to go back. What is radon? Well, radon is a gas. But probably more important is it's naturally occurring. Yes, there are some situations in parts of the state, over in the western slope and down in the southwest, where there are some man-made situations that caused radon problems. But those are very rare. The vast majority of radon that we see in homes here in Colorado comes from naturally occurring uranium that we find in the granites of the Rocky Mountains or where they have eroded out in the plains. And this uranium in the soil breaks down to radium, which breaks down to radon. And of course, as a gas, it can leave the matrix of the soil. A lot of it gets into the outdoor air. Our concern is when it gets into homes and accumulates to a concentration that can present a health risk. So it primarily comes from the underlying geology. Why are buyers concerned is perhaps the next question. Certainly, long-term, and I emphasize the term long-term exposure to radon can increase the potential for lung cancer. So we have, certainly in an environment that we live in Colorado, a lot of people are concerned about their health, not just outdoors, but also indoors. A second reason is resale value. That perhaps down the road, the next buyer of that property is going to be concerned about radon, and let's find out if we have a concern in this house and fix it if need be. And even consider fixing it before you list the property. We see that occurring now. The third reason is that many relocation firms and now more lenders and warehouse lines are requiring radon levels to be less than a certain level that I'll mention here in a second before they will lend on that property or do the guaranteed buyout in a corporate relocation. And actually, this is expanding. We now see it moving into multifamily structures. HUD is requiring radon testing and actually mitigation of multifamily dwellings, as well as incorporating systems during construction of new multifamily. So it's an expanding area as we find out that it is ubiquitous throughout certain areas of the country, such as this one. So the question then is, what is an acceptable level? Well, the Surgeon General recommends against long-term exposure above 4 picocuries per liter. I know that's a strange term. But that's a level of radiation that comes from a certain amount of gas that it can accumulate in the house. And we definitely have some homes that are well above that, when we have a number of homes below it. It's not a question of whether we have radon in homes in Colorado, it's how much radon we have. And the other thing I want to point out again, it's long-term exposure, which means one has the time in order to fully assess and address the concerns. We don't need to run out of the house and live somewhere else if we have a level above 4 picocuries per liter. So that 4 picocuries per liter is the common criteria that you typically see in real estate contracts in the contingencies. But the buyer may not be comfortable with 4. There are some recommendations by the World Health Organization that it be less than 4, like 2 picocuries. and some people may be okay with 4. It's an individual decision. So typically we see 4 written, but sometimes people will write into the contract lower levels. It's good to be specific, though, what's going to be acceptable rather than as low as reasonably achievable. Going back to the incidence of radon, again, Colorado is not the only state that has this concern. The map that I'm showing is the US EPA map of radon zones. And those red areas are counties that are colored in that have the highest potential of doing a test like the one you conduct at the time of sale, of having a result greater than 4. It doesn't mean that all the areas that are red are above 4. It doesn't even mean the average. It just means there's a high enough potential that it would justify actually incorporating radon control techniques during construction. So as we look at this map, you can see this red line that goes down through the Rocky Mountains, through Montana and Wyoming and Colorado, down into northern New Mexico. That's the granitic formations, the geology, that has a little higher uranium content. You see the same thing in the Appalachians back east. Down through the Midwest, you can see a band, which was the advance of the last glacier, where there was some uranium-containing materials deposited by the glacier. This map is, kind of interesting, I think, because you may have a buyer coming in from out of state who hears about radon here in Colorado. They may be moving from an area that is just the highest potential as we are. So this, misery loves company. We're not alone in this particular concern. In fact, if you look at the Colorado map, since the EPA map was generated, additional surveys done by the Colorado Department of Public Health and Environment, the entire state is red. So all of Colorado is considered to be Zone 1, highest potential, and mathematically, roughly about 50% of the homes in this state are thought to be at or above that 4 picocuries per liter that I mentioned. So it's here. Now, certainly we have a higher frequency as you get along the foothills in the Front Range or on the western slope or in the central mountains, but we also see it out further on the plains. So all areas have the potential. And because it's dependent upon geology and a few other factors of soil permeability and just like location of a house, its value is dependent upon location sometimes, that there's a lot of variation in neighborhoods and even house to house. You cannot make an assumption based upon a general area. The only way you're going to know what's in a house is to test it. So let's talk about testing. When you're testing at the time of sale, the objective is a little different than you may be testing your own home to see what your family's exposed to. The purpose is to determine the radon potential of the house, independent of how one might live in it. Some people like to have their doors and windows open all the time. Some people don't. So we're trying to determine the potential of the property. And we have to do it quickly. So the way we go about it at the time of sale is we close up all the exterior doors and windows for 12 hours prior to a minimum 2-day test. Kind of trying to drive the radon up a little bit, but also trying to duplicate, say, wintertime conditions when you don't have the doors and windows left open. We also test in the lowest portion of the house because that's where the radon comes in, such that if we test in that lowest occupiable portion of the house, and I don't mean crawl spaces, it has to be an occupiable portion of the house. If it's less than 4 in that lower level, we can say with very good confidence that it's less than 4 in upper levels. So that's why professional testers will place devices for a short-term period of time in the lowest portion of the house. And they recognize that we don't spend all of our time, say, in the basement. But we could do know that if it's less than 4 in the basement, it's also less than 4 in the upper levels. As well as closed building conditions, if it's less than that, we are pretty confident it'd be less than 4 picocuries per liter on a year-long basis. Because remember, the Surgeon General recommends not having exposures greater than 4 on a long-term basis. So the short-term measurements that are done at the time of sale are sort of a quick check to try to get an idea of the potential of the home. And if you really want to know, you do a long-term test for at least 91 days. And sometimes I've heard of people setting escrow funds aside or doing a long-term test to verify you really do need to have a problem, need to fix the property. So let's look little deeper into the testing. Again, we want to get quick results. And there's a couple methods that are used. This would be like two short-term devices that stay in the house for 2 to 3 days and sent off to a laboratory. And then we'll give you the average of the radon. And we do 2 of them because we would expect the levels to be the same, kind of a check on the quality of the measurements. We would base our decision upon the average of these 2 results. The same is true of other devices. Here's another one, or another set, I should say, that would be deployed in the house for that same 2-day period. The measurement professional can actually read these themselves. They don't need to be shipped off to the lab, so you can get quicker results. And then another one that's very common is a continuous radon monitor. And there's several brands out there. But as you look in the slide, you can see a graph. This will measure radon on an hourly basis. So you can see changes in radon. And it will change as a function of weather, but also if people open and close doors. So it provides a means for the tester to determine if the occupant of the house really maintained or adhered to the protocols and instructions that were provided. All of these devices are of equal accuracy at the time of sale, whether the average in ones, the duplicate averages, or the continuous monitor. These are approved devices, provided they are approved by the National Proficiency Programs. They will provide you a result. And even if you use an hourly measurement, the decision is going to be based upon the average of those hourly measurements. So they don't provide any better or more accurate information. They provide additional information for the home inspector, the radon professional, to place confidence in the measurements that it really is a good screening measurement. So some advice to the real estate professional, because some of these are fairly complex in how you measure them and so forth, use a certified tester. And there are national proficiency programs out there that a person who goes through a training program, much like your profession, sets exams, continuing education requirements, and they use approved devices. These are not devices that you can casually go down to the hardware store and pick up. Although there are devices at the hardware store, these are approved and they have a lot more quality assurance, quality control that goes into them. So use a certified tester. A list of those can be found at the coloradoradon.info, which is a site operated by the Colorado Department of Public Health and Environment. Again, you included as part of a normal inspection. I would not recommend you as the agent doing the test. And if you use a home inspector, make sure that not only are they home inspector, but they're also certified in doing radon measurements. That's an additional credential that they get to have. And as far as interpreting the measurements, what do they mean? This is a brand new document that just came out from the Colorado Department of Public Health and Environment that helps interpret what the measurements mean for your clients. It's a much, much simpler document than the previous US EPA documents. Quite frankly, it says if you like the house, buy it. The radon can be reduced. So it's a great resource you can get off their website. Also, they'll send copies, and a lot of agents have used this to fulfill their disclosure requirements too. But let this be your interpreter. Also, when radon comes up, when you put in an offer together, my suggestion is to be concise to what gets written in there. If you write this offer is contingent upon a radon test, well, that's really not very definitive. Here's some suggested language. It's contingent upon a radon test being less than 4 picocuries, or maybe another number if they prefer, when conducted by certified radon measurement professional. They'll go one step further. You might as well put in there, what's going to happen if it is elevated. Address that up front. So the paragraph goes on. If radon is elevated, mitigation repairs may be made, provided they are performed by a licensed and certified radon contractor with approach acceptable to the buyer. There's different ways that this can be fixed. I suggest that the buyer be involved a little bit in what it looks like, or how it's going to operate, because they're going to live in that house, and you want to maintain the resale value of the property. Also going on saying that if they mitigate, that mitigation is acceptable and it's going to be verified with another test in the same location as the initial one that it be less than 4 picocuries per liter when verified by a certified measurement professional. So what is radon mitigation? Well, it's a little foreign to some people. They think just opening windows and so forth, that doesn't really work. What we do instead is we actually draw the radon out from the underlying geology and exhaust it to the atmosphere where it doesn't present a risk anymore. And how it's done is a function of the foundation. On the slide, I show 3 different simple diagrams of houses. On the left-hand side, you see a slab-on grade or a basement slab, basically a 4 to 6 inch diameter holes cut through the concrete slab. About 5 to 10 gallons of the dirt is excavated out by hand, connected to a PVC pipe that is routed up through the house or maybe to the outside, and a fan which pulls about 60 to 70 watts, runs continuously, that draws the radon laterally into the soil and exhausts it outside. In the case of a crawl space, well, there is no concrete slab, so we lay down a polyethylene sheet, much like this, and adhere it to the walls, put a perforated pipe underneath it, and draw the vacuum out. When you draw the air out from underneath that poly, you're pulling out radon as well as moisture and exhaust it in the outside. And the third approach, which is very, very common in Colorado, is where there's a sump or an exterior perimeter drain. You can attach your 4-inch pipe to that drainage system, also the same kind of radon fan, draw the radon out, and exhaust it to a safe location outside. These systems are very, very functional, durable. Some of the original systems that were installed in Colorado back in the 1980s are still operating today. And how well does it work? Here's a graph of a continuous radon monitor, like I showed you before, that shows the hourly measurements of radon before the mitigation system was turned on. Then we turned it on, and you can see how quickly the radon levels dropped to a whole new equilibrium. In fact, after 24 hours after the repair is completed, you can go back in and retest. So it can move pretty fast to get mitigated, typically in a day, wait for a day, another 2-day period for a retest to verify. And then the recommendation is once every 2 years thereafter to test the house. That's good sense. There's some other indicators that the mitigation contractor will put in to help indicate when there's a problem with the system, but they're actually pretty bulletproof. Another consideration always is cost. And the cost of a mitigation system is not a function of the radon levels. It's a function of how the house is built. What type of foundation, whether it's a basement or a crawl space needing plastic, or maybe the house has been added onto multiple times. Now, you won't need to have a system for each type of foundation. You generally have suction points that are tied together to a single fan if the layout of the house allows it. Another aspect of cost is what it looks like. Mitigation contractor may have multiple options as to where he puts this, and perhaps put it in a more concealed spot will be more costly. So you may want to consider a little bit of what's it going to look like. Is it going to be painted? Is the fan going to be enclosed? And although that may not be a cost borne by the seller, it's a cost that the buyer may want to consider. Another point I want to really point out here is the discharge point. We go to all this trouble of drawing radon out from underneath the foundation. We don't want it to blow back in the window after a person opens the window. So that's why the discharges are to be above the roof. They come up to the edge of the eave or up to the rake edge of the roof, provided that they're a location where it won't come in. So generally at least 10 foot away above ground and 2 foot above any opening to the structure. But again, be above the roof. Some additional considerations, again, mitigation contractors go through an educational process, an examination, agree to follow certain standards and so forth to become certified. And to find a list of certified contractors, go to that same website I mentioned before at coloradoradon.info, operated by the Colorado Department of Public Health and Environment. And to get on that list, they have to be certified, but it doesn't necessarily mean that they are licensed contractors. So that's the second thing. In entertaining bids or having someone do this work, just like you would have an electrical contractor who's licensed to do electrical work, these mitigation contractors should also be licensed to do basic remodeling kind of work. So the radon certification as well as contractor's license. Most contractors will provide guarantees to get it less than 4 picocuries per liter in order to allow your transaction to go forward. And don't just assume that the mitigation works. It needs to be verified, so it should bring in a third-party tester. Once again, although the mitigation contractor may do a test themselves, it's very prudent to make sure that an independent third-party tester verified. In fact, it may be the original inspector working on behalf of the buyer that comes back to verify it. These same systems that draw the radon off from the soil can be incorporated into new home construction. In fact, more and more Colorado builders are installing systems during construction, either as a value-added feature for their buyers, and as well as more and more jurisdictions are mandating the incorporation of radon control techniques. So it really makes a lot of sense to do this. For the main advantage, it's fixed and you don't see it because it's incorporated into the structure as shown in the diagram. It's hidden in the walls. So kind of in summary, you know, radon is here in Colorado. With 50% of the homes being at or above the Surgeon General guidance, chances are sometime in your career as a real estate professional you're going to run across radon if you haven't already done so. It's an easy test to incorporate as part of the normal part of the inspection. It's a simple 2-day test. Just make sure the occupant adheres to the instructions, keeping doors and windows closed, and don't move the device. And then homes can be mitigated typically in a day and retested in tubes. So it hasn't been a single house in Colorado since I've been dealing with radon, I hate to say it, in the 1980s, that we can't fix. It's all fixable if you deal with it just like any other repair, as you are very good at negotiating as well. So some additional resources, again, there's that website, www.coloradoradon.info. There's a lot of good things on there, videos, some of the disclosure documents that is really designed to help you and your clients, whether you're a buyer's agent or a seller's agent. And if there's not what you really need there, it doesn't answer the question, feel free to call Chris Kelly with the state of Colorado, the Radon Program Manager. There's her phone number. She talks to clients. And my phone number there as well. I would be more than happy, and I'd love to hear any questions you may have. Thank you very much.